Okay. Let's get started. This is part 4 of our series on the 4th chapter of Bava Metzia, and we are going to spend this evening on page 45b, although we will get almost to the bottom of the page, and we will start next time, more or less at the top of the next page. So just a word of introduction before we start. There is one form of acquisition that we've already talked about in this chapter, which is the thing that the Mishnah calls pulling, or meshicha, which is when you pick something up with your hands. That's the most, I guess, obvious or straightforward way of taking possession of property. But there are other ways, and tonight we're going to be mostly focused on a different one, which is called chalipin, which is where you pick up an object which is not an object connected to the transaction. It's not the thing that you're buying or selling. It's not the money that you're paying for the transaction. It's an unrelated object that belongs to one of the people. There is a dispute which person it is supposed to belong to, but not taking a side on that dispute. It belongs to somebody involved in the transaction, and the person who does not own it picks it up, puts it down, hands it back to the original person, and that causes the transaction to happen. That's called chalipin. And the reason you might use the transaction of chalipin rather than just picking up the thing that you're taking possession of would be, for example, if the thing you're taking possession of is not small enough to pick up. If you, for example, you're taking possession of real estate, or if the thing that you're taking possession of is not physically present, it's somewhere else, it's inaccessible in some way or for some reason. Okay, now the thing with
Deborah, just a very quick question. It's Mindy.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we even need to do that? It seems, I mean, I've learned also a little bit about chalipin, but why do we need to introduce an extra step before acquiring an object?
So it's not an extra step before acquiring. It is the act of acquiring. And I think because we need there to be an obvious moment when something changes possession. So there has to be something that happens that's like physically detectable that makes things not now belong to someone different than the person they used to belong to. And if you can't pick up the object you're actually transferring, or for that matter, if what you're actually transferring is a responsibility rather than an object, that's the other thing that chalipin does, is it allows you to acquire an abstraction, which is not something you can pick up. Then you need to do something other than picking the thing up. So chalipin would be usually our first choice in that regard. There are other kinyanim that can work for things that are not physically present, or if you can't pick them up, but they're more complicated, and this is usually what we do.
But in your footnote, though, you had said that the chalipin itself isn't the acquisition.
I think what I said is that the object being picked up is not being acquired.
This picking up is symbolic.
It does not imply acquisition of the thing you're picking up. I'm sorry, I should have been more specific.
I see.
Right. So, for example, the original kinyan chalipin that everything is based on happens in the 4th chapter of Megillat Rut. And at that point, it's not entirely clear exactly what is being transferred. Probably the responsibility to purchase the fields, maybe the fields themselves, and the responsibility to marry Ruth. And one person takes off their shoe and hands it to the other person. It is not clear whether Boaz takes off his shoe and hands it to Ploni, or whether Ploni takes off his shoe and hands it to Boaz. But either way, this combination of abstract responsibility and real estate is acquired by handing over a shoe, but then the shoe goes back to the person it was taken from and goes back on the foot it came off of. It the shoe itself has not changed possession, which is what I meant by and doesn't imply acquisition of the object.
Yeah, okay, I understand now. And does
Okay.
all this assume that there isn't a document that
Correct. This is a way of transferring responsibility or ownership of land that does not require literacy, which presumably at a time when literacy was rarer and you had to pay somebody else to write your documents for you, meant that was important for at least people who didn't have a lot of money.
Okay, I understand. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, so our issue now is whether we can blur the line and whether the object that you pick up for the chalipin can actually be a coin. Right? Does that break the rules of chalipin because that looks too much like just paying money? Okay, so let's go into the Gemara. So the other thing I would mention is that we seem again to have a dispute in which we don't know who's on which side. That seems to be becoming a theme for us in this chapter. And I don't know if that's because something happened with this particular chapter or if it's just random. But in any case, Rav Levi, we have these two guys, Rav and Levi. Rav is more often paired with Shmuel, but Shmuel and Levi and Rav all live simultaneously. They all interact with each other around Torah. And this time it's Rav and Levi. Chad Amar, one of them said, Matbea naseh chalipin, that a coin can in fact be used for chalipin. The Chad Amar ein matbea naseh chalipin. The other one said a coin can't be used for chalipin. This may or may not also be connected, by the way, to the question of whether a coin is a kli, because the object used for chalipin needs to be a kli. Of course, the problem with the word kli is that it's almost impossible to define. In Tanakh, a kli is almost any object which is man-made and useful. But not quite every object, and coins seem to be on the edge, whether they count or not. Okay. Amar Rav Papa. So Rav Papa said, "My tama demand amar ein matbeh naseh chalipin." So whoever it is that said that you can't use a coin for chalipin, why did he say that? Mishum didate atsurta v'tsurta avida debatla. So because when a person uses a coin, they're not focused on, they're not thinking about the physical object of the coin or the value of the precious metal that the coin is made out of. They're focused on, they're interested in, they're thinking about the picture that's printed on the coin. And that is not only not necessarily inherently valuable, but it's also temporary, because the image is subject to the king deciding he wants to print a different image, either because the current king dies and the new king would like coins with his own picture on them, or because the king is still the same guy, but he doesn't like the picture of him that's on the coin, and so he commissions a whole new set of coins and makes everybody hand in their coins to be reminted. Apparently this was an issue. And so while the chunk of silver that the coin is made out of has a certain durability in its value, the actual minting of it into a coin is seen as very highly temporary. And so it's when you're thinking about coins, you're not really thinking about the physical object, so somehow it lacks the physicality, the objectness to be used for chalipin, according to Rav Papa.
Deborah,
Okay.
It's me again. So when I read this, the first thing I thought of is why does it matter? And specifically because the footnote said that it's only symbolic and you're not acquiring this coin anyway. So you're not thinking about the image of the on the coin, you're thinking about this land that you're buying, and you're just using this coin as a means to an end. So who cares about whose image is on it? I don't think anyone is even looking.
So that would be a pretty good position for the guy who thinks that you can use chalipin, like money for chalipin. Like I think that our job here is to figure out what each side could be thinking and to come up with something that's plausible that someone could think that. But we don't have to agree with both sides, because that's not going to happen. That's why they're having a disagreement, is because some people think one and some people think the other. But on the whole, I think you have a point that you can have some technical requirements for this, but ultimately it really shouldn't matter that much as long as everybody buys into it. It should be a more of a universal consent kind of thing, rather than a customary kind of thing, rather than a legal technicality kind of thing.
I mean, if you could use a pen, like nobody is looking at the kind of ink that's in the pen or the monogram that's on the pen, or
yes, although in fairness, if I'm writing with my, I don't know, what kind of pencil do I have here? I have a Papermate pencil on my desk. And if I'm writing with my Papermate pencil, and then Papermate goes out of business, or even for that matter, Papermate is sued and becomes, everybody's favorite thing to hate, and no one would even dream of Papermate anymore, the pencil will still write, right? Its value doesn't actually depend on its externalities. Whereas if the king decides that I'm not allowed to use the coins that have his old picture where he thinks he had a bad haircut on them, it might actually become impossible to spend. The coin might actually stop working. So it's not quite the same.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that the thing is that we need, as I said, we need something which is going to be similar to a shoe, in the sense that it is man-made and useful. And if the usefulness of this coin is dependent on the whim of somebody who lives 1,000 miles away from me and I have no control over, then it may in fact be that it's not eternally useful in the way that a shoe is.
Okay.
So I'm inclined to agree with you that I would have poskened the other way, but I think we have to also come up with a logic that fits for the other guy.
And do you think that logic is plausible?
Yes.
That someone is thinking about the image on the coin?
Well, in the sense that the merchant is willing to accept coins, that in general, merchants are willing to accept coins because they have pictures stamped on them. And if you show up with just pieces of silver, you'll have a lot more trouble spending them. Yes, I think that part's true.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Not that a chunk of silver isn't valuable, it's just hard to spend, so it's not as useful as money. Okay. So now we're gonna quote our Mishnah and try to find evidence for this issue one way or the other from our Mishnah. So our Mishnah said, Tnan, hazahav koneh kesef. Gold buys silver, which in our original context, we thought that meant that we were using silver as money to buy gold, because we were trading gold coins for silver coins. And in that transaction, the silver was the money and the gold was the merchandise. So that is how we understood this Mishnah when we read it originally. But we are going to take a little excursion into an alternative explanation here. The Gemara says, wait a minute, my love chalipin, isn't that a case of chalipin? Meaning, if I take the gold and that makes the silver belong to you, then that actually sounds a lot like a case where I picked up something that isn't the thing you're trying to acquire, and then suddenly it became yours, even though it's not actually present, and neither of us is holding it. So that sounds like it might be a little bit like chalipin. Of course, that if this is describing a case of chalipin, then I'd have to give back the gold coin and I wouldn't get to keep it. But we're gonna reject it anyway. So we're not. I don't think we need to take it quite that far. But isn't this chalipin? Ushma mina matbea nase chalipin, and in that case, we would learn from it that a coin can in fact be used for chalipin, because what you picked up in this case in the Mishnah was a gold coin. And the Gemara says, no, lo bidamim. No, in fact, that was a financial transaction, a transaction where we were using the coins as money. We're using them to buy each other. But the Gemara says, no, that's not going to work. Ihachi hazahav hakonet hakesef mechayev ba'ele. Right? If in fact my picking up the gold just makes me owe you silver, rather than making you the owner of my silver wherever it may be, then the Mishnah should have said that when I pick up the gold, that causes a debt of silver, instead of saying it buys the silver. Because, in fact, it's not true that when I pick up the merchandise, that makes you own the money that's still in my wallet. What it does is it makes me have to pay you, but it doesn't make there be specific physical coins in my pocket that are actually already your property. That's not accurate. So it should say it creates a debt, and they say, okay, fine, change the text of the Mishnah. Tanei hazahav mechayev. Let's say let's just change the text of the Mishnah to say the merchandise causes a debt, and presumably we're going to have to do that all the way through the whole Mishnah, through all of the cases. That we're going to have to say that except for the case where we were exchanging metaltalin, for that case maybe not, but for all of the other cases we're going to have to say have to translate, instead of buys, we're going to have to say it creates a debt of. Okay, but apparently we're prepared to do that. And in fact, we think that this is actually the only sensible way to read the Mishnah. Midiktani seifa, because it says in the end, hakesef eino konet hazahav. Silver does not buy gold. And if we were talking about a financial transaction, as we should be, then hainu damrinan dehava peira v'kaspatava, because then this just continues to express the same idea that we were expressing before, which is that gold is merchandise and silver is coins. This is tiva, but I would have thought it was tava, whatever it is. Vitava pera lokani, and money can't buy merchandise. Because as we established at the beginning, it always works the other way around. The transaction doesn't finish until the merchandise is delivered. So we say the merchandise buys the money. So if we read it as a financial transaction, it makes sense that silver can't buy gold. However, Ella iam rinan bechalipin. But if we say that the Mishnah is talking about chalipin, then tarvaihu liknu ahadade, it should be symmetrical. There's no particular reason why it should matter whether I pick up for chalipin purposes a silver coin or a gold coin. If it's only symbolic anyway, what difference does it make? It should work either way. So there's no, the rest of the Mishnah doesn't make any sense. The asymmetry of the Mishnah doesn't make any sense if we're talking about chalipin. So I think we're now convinced that in fact our Mishnah was talking about actual financial transactions in which you're actually trading silver coins for gold coins, and they're not symbolic. They're actually being given to the other person. Okay. So now we have another bright. Ve'od time. Hakesef eino konet hazahav. So this bright begins sort of the way our Mishnah ended. Silver doesn't buy gold, except then it continues from that point. Ketzad, how does that work? Machar lo 25 dinar shel kesef b'dinar shel zahav. So if the person we're starting with, we'll call him the merchant, sold the other person 25 silver dinars for a gold dinar, when that's the exchange rate that we mentioned. I think it's 2 years ago that we had the exchange rates. The 1 to 25 is the correct exchange rate for dinars. And I have 25 silver dinars, you have 1 gold dinar, and I'm giving you change in effect. And I'm selling you 25. It's the equivalent of my selling you 10 dimes for a dollar bill. Right? You wouldn't think that there'd be really anything interesting to say about that transaction at all, actually. But apparently there is. So if one person is selling 25 silver dinars for 1 gold dinar, then even though I guess we'll call him the buyer, has already taken the silver, that person does not become the owner of the silver they already picked up until the other person picks up the gold. So if we say that this is talking about a financial transaction using coins as money, then mishum hachi lokani, that would explain why the first person picking up the silver coins doesn't cause anything to change ownership, because picking up the money, the seller picking up the money never causes things to change ownership. It's only the buyer picking up the merchandise that causes a change in ownership. That's been our principle throughout the whole chapter so far. But if you were to say that it's about chalipin, and the person picking up the 25 silver coins isn't really getting the 25 silver coins, they're just symbolically indicating that they no longer own the gold coin, then in that case, Nigni, that should work. Why not? Elamai. So instead, what must be the case? Bidamim. It must in fact be that Breita also is talking about using coins to buy other coins as a financial transaction, as money. Okay. In that case, ihachi ema resha. So in that case, we need to go back to the beginning of the Breita and quote it to show that this is not going to work. Of course, we haven't seen the whole Breita yet. But the Gemara does this a lot with Breita, where it'll quote part of it and then talk about an interpretation and say, haha, but that can't work because of this other part of the Breita that I've been hiding. And now I will reveal it to you. That's actually a fairly normal structure. Okay, so the piece at the beginning that we're now going to quote is Hazahav koneh kesef. Gold buys silver. Heitzad. How does that work? All right, this Breita seems to have been something resembling a commentary on our Mishnah, because each clause of the Breita seems to start with a phrase from our Mishnah and then the question, how does that work? And then an explanation. Okay, so how does that work? Macharlo dinar shel zahav be'esrim v'chamisha dinar shel kesef. If he was selling a gold dinar for 25 silver dinars, then kevan shemashach zahav nikna kesef b'chol makom shehu. Once the former owner of the silver picks up the gold, the silver has been bought. It has changed ownership wherever it may be. So that does sound a lot like chalipin. The purpose of chalipin is to allow the transfer of ownership of things that are not present. And it does, in fact, sound like the sort of thing that happens when I pick up something here, and all of a sudden you own something in New York. Right? That's what chalipin is for. Okay. So now the Gemara says, if you say correctly that this is talking about chalipin, then that's why it said that the silver is transferred ownership wherever it may be, because that's how chalipin works. It transfers ownership of things that are not here. But if you say we're talking about money, as in getting change for a gold dinar by exchanging it for 25 silver dinars, then when it says the silver is bought wherever it may be, it should say instead the other person is responsible to pay the silver, right? Not a specific silver coin has become yours. but this person now has a debt to you of silver that they're going to eventually have to pay. Amar Rav Ashi leolam b'damim. So Rav Ashi says, no, I can even understand that part of the Breita as talking about a financial transaction of trading coins for other coins and getting change. Because I'm gonna reread this problematic phrase. Umay b'kol makom shehu. What does it mean when it says wherever it may be? It means kimot shehu. It means like it is or as it is, which it's in turn means kid amar le, like the way he said it to him, which seems to mean not that the silver, wherever it may be, now belongs to you, but that the responsibility to pay you silver is a responsibility to pay you the kind of silver that you were promised before I picked up the gold coin. And then we give an example. If the person who just picked up the gold had said to the other person, I will give you to you from a new purse or a new money bag, whatever, then lo matzi yahiv le arniki yeshanat. Then he can't give him from an old money bag, which doesn't seem actually to be about the age of the bag you keep the coins in. It seems to be the about the contents of the money bag. Sounds like they kept older coins and newer coins in different bags. Maybe because that kept the newer ones from tarnishing for longer. I'm not really sure. Or there's some other form of damage that you're worried about being contagious between coins. I'm not sure. Or maybe just because they have slightly different values and you're keeping them sorted. That might be. But in any case, if you promise to pay out of your bag of new coins, you cannot now pay out of your bag of old coins. Even though old coins are better than new coins. Apparently, people are very suspicious of new coins when you try to spend them. They look a little bit too good, and people think that they might be fake. And so most people apparently would prefer older looking coins because they look more authentic. But even though most people prefer older looking coins, if you promise this person new coins, you need to give them the new coins that you promised them. My Tama, why do you need to give them the old sorry, why do you need to give them the new coins instead of the old coins? The Amar le liyashnan kabainan lahu, because the other person is entitled to say, I was planning to keep them until they get old. Right? This is the money I'm planning to put away in the back of my dresser to give to my new baby on his wedding day. And I need something that could actually like sit in a bag in the back of a dresser drawer for 25 years without getting tarnished beyond use. So I need some brand new coins for that. Right? And the fact that you would rather have old coins, or even that almost everybody would rather have old coins, isn't connected to the fact that this person is entitled to say that they personally prefer new coins, in which case, if that's what you promised them, that's what you have to deliver. So Rav Papa now pops up again. Amar Rav Papa, Afil Lamanta Amar Ein Matbe'ana Sechalipin. He says, even according to the people who say that coins cannot be used for chalipin, and notice that at this point, we have not succeeded in demonstrating one way or the other whether a coin can be used for chalipin. We were able to read both the Mishnah and the Breita both ways. And in fact, in the end, we preferred the reading that read them both as not being about chalipin. But the fact that they're not about chalipin doesn't mean that you can't do chalipin. It just means you can't prove that you can do it. So we at this point we have no proof for either Rav or Levi. So we're still going to have to continue operating with both positions. So Rav Papa says, even according to the person who said that you can't use a coin for chalipin, mi avad hu delo avid chalipin. It's just excuse me, using it for chalipin that does not work. But aknuye mikne b'chalipin. The coins can be acquired using chalipin. Meaning, if I have coins somewhere else and I want to give them to you and I want to make them belong to you right now, even though I don't have them to actually put them in your hand, we could instead do a transaction of chalipin, and now the coins belong to you, even though they're, I don't know, in my father's safe deposit box in Chicago. Right? And you've never seen them and I don't have access to them. They could still belong to you as a result of our doing chalipin. That Rav Papa says everybody agrees that that works. That the money can change ownership using chalipin. You just, according to one side of this dispute, you wouldn't be able to use a coin as the object you picked up. You'd have to use a pen or a handkerchief or whatever. Okay. Midi to have a peril of Rav Nachman. And in that case, it will just work just like fruit. And here I think we are actually talking about fruit as opposed to merchandise, but I can't prove that. According to Rav Nachman. And then we explain what that is. Peril of Rav Nachman lav afagav inhu lo avdi chalipin. So according to Rav Nachman, you can't use fruit for chalipin. In fact, I think everybody agrees that you can't use food for chalipin. So Rav Nachman says, even though fruit cannot be used for chalipin, aknuye miknu bechalipin isn't you can acquire, or can't you acquire fruit using chalipin? So tavanami loshna. So coin similarly can also be acquired using chalipin. So for example, right, the acquiring food using chalipin is the sort of thing that this would actually be very useful for. Suppose I have a silo full of wheat, right? That's not it. I guess each wheat grain is the sort of thing a person could pick up. Even like individual bags of wheat are something a person could pick up, but the whole silo, certainly not. And one certainly does sometimes transactions in which one sells the entire harvest. And so the way you would transfer that food would be using chalipin. So in the same way as Rav Nachman says you can sell or buy food using chalipin, you can also, according to him, sell coins or I guess money is all coins in his world using chalipin. Since you can also transfer a responsibility using chalipin, right? So there's actually two different things you could do. One of them is you could say, by picking up this pen, I am obligating myself to pay you $100. And then when you pick up the pen, now you owe $100, but not any specific money. Or you can say, by picking up this pen, I'm giving you these three 20s and 4 $10 bills that are folded in my sock drawer. And in which case, at that point, those specific pieces of paper will now belong to the other person, even though they're not present during the transaction.
And those things, Deborah, have to be articulated. Like you have, in order for it to be valid.
Yes, I believe you have to say what is happening as a result of the chalipin, because otherwise it would not be, because it's purely symbolic, otherwise it would not be clear what you're accepting.
Right. Plus it's instead of written documentation, so it has to be verbalized.
Correct. Although there are cases, the case in which we do chalipin most, the two cases in which we most frequently do chalipin in modern Judaism have both a written document and a chalipin. In both cases, because we're on sort of shaky legal ground and we want to make sure it works. One of those is the assigning to somebody else of the responsibility to sell your chametz. And so we use a document and we also use chalipin, or at least many rabbis also, at least if you can come in person to do chalipin, would prefer that you did. And that's because the whole thing is, as I said, on sort of shaky legal ground to begin with. So we'd like to shore it up anywhere we can. And the other place that we most often use chalipin is at the chatan's tish at a wedding, when the chatan accepts the obligations of the ketubah.
Right.
So he does that both by instructing the witnesses to sign the document that says that he agreed to do the responsibilities of the ketubah, but also he does it by picking up an object to symbolize his acceptance of the responsibilities. And again, it's not, a recent innovation of the last few hundred years, the way selling chametz is. It's exceedingly old, may go all the way back to the Torah, but it is a little bit on shaky legal ground, because generally speaking, we don't let people accept responsibilities to pay vast amounts of money at some point in the distant future if something unlikely happens. Like normally we wouldn't allow someone to take such a responsibility, and if they did, we would say it didn't work. And so here, we kind of bypass that by writing right there in the document, this is not an asmachta being an agreement to pay money if something unlikely happens. So since we wrote it's not an asmachta in the ketubah, it must not be an asmachta. Yeah. We also kind of belt and suspenders it by having him take the responsibility in two different ways. Again, because the whole thing is kind of iffy.
Okay.
And it's worth noting that in both of those cases where we're still using chalipin now, we're using chalipin to accept responsibilities, not objects. Because generally speaking, right now, if you were to sell real estate, you would go to the Norfolk County Registry of Deeds and sign paperwork with attorneys and then file your paperwork with the Registry of Deeds, because halacha is happy in financial matters. For the most part, halacha is perfectly happy to accept whatever methods people of your local society agree work to transfer property. And the County of Norfolk is not actually really ready to accept whatever methods we decide to use to transfer property. So we use the methods of Norfolk County rather than the methods of halacha for property sales.
Right.
In this particular time and place. Okay, that is what I have for this evening. Are there more questions?
So in the case of the chametz, you said that they're both cases of responsibility assignments.
Yeah.
So the rabbi is taking the responsibility of selling the person's chametz for them.
Correct. The rabbi is not actually taking possession of your chametz. He is just becoming your messenger to sell the chametz. Although I have never actually been present when they do the actual sale of chametz with the non-Jew later on. My impression is that there is a chalipin done again there, because we do every method of acquisition that we have available, because there are disputes about all of them, whether they work with non-Jews. So we need to cover our ground there and make sure that according to everybody, it got sold.
Right. So which legal thing is shaky? Like
with the chametz?
No, with the whole. You said that we do chalipin and we have a document because the legal ground on which the whole thing is based is shaky, and I was just wondering.
Yes. Well,
what's shaky exactly?
Okay, so if I actually bring a box of Ritz crackers to Rabbi Chess's office and I hand it to Rabbi Chess's and I said, can you find me a buyer for this box of crackers? And he goes out and he finds someone who wants to pay $3 for the box of crackers and sells it to them for $3. That is not shaky. That's real. That's me assigning him to sell my property. He sold my property. He comes back to me with the money. Right? That's a real sale. Well, the problem here is that the whole thing is sort of, I don't want to pierce the legal veil if anyone hasn't noticed yet, but the whole thing is sort of a fantasy, right? We're selling your chametz to somebody who's never actually going to come take it and is going to transfer it back to you the very moment that it would be convenient to you to own it again. And you will actually not notice that it ever belonged to somebody else, except insofar as that's convenient to you.
Right.
So that's
Right. The
That
whole,
is such an
yeah.
abstraction that we need to make sure it has some kind of concrete existence, or we can't believe in it.
Right. What was the other example? Because we
The
all
other
know
example is the ketubah.
the ketubah. Okay.
So a ketubah is a commitment to pay a certain sum of money, is a combination of the money that the bride brought into the marriage and more money that the groom is committing from his own money. And it is a commitment to pay that amount of money in the event that either the groom dies or the bride and groom get divorced.
Right. And that's much more likely to happen than the Jew coming for your chametz.
Yes, it is. Divorce and death are both much more likely than that someone will actually show up at my house in the middle of Pesach and want my half-eaten box of pasta. I grant that, but it is unlikely enough that if the ketubah didn't already exist as an institution, we would not allow that as a right. You, if you were to want to sign a document that says, I'll give Deborah Klapper $1,000, if, I don't know, so-and-so, the guy who lives down the street, dies. We would, I think, not let you write that document, or if you wrote it, it wouldn't work. Because we assume that the reason you're doing it, sort of like gambling, the reason you're doing it is because you think the guy's not going to die. So you're not really agreeing to give the money. You're just trying to get away with something. And so we usually assume that if you're committing money in the event of something that you could imagine might never happen, then you're not making a real commitment, and then we can't really make you pay.
Right. Okay.
So it's more, the problem with the ketubah is more when if you actually make the guy cough up the money in the event of the divorce,
right,
where he ought to be able to say, yeah, but I thought it was going to be a happy marriage. I didn't really mean I was going to give her the money. Right. But we do not allow that because, as I said, we write in the ketubah right there clearly, this is not an asmachta. And that apparently, those magic words apparently stop it from being an asmachta.
Okay.
Okay, anything else? Anybody else? Okay, then I will see you all next Monday. Have a wonderful week.
You too. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.